Okay, hello everyone. We are back. We are live. Today we will be talking to Sean Madden of Easton Training Center about how gyms market fighters. This is part of our series on marketing Muay Thai. This is episode 7, I believe. Today's episode has been brought to you by Nak Muay Legends that provides apparel supporting the legends of the sport, both past and present. You can use MTG as your promo code to get 15% off your order. Today we are also doing badges, which is a new Instagram rollout. So if you like the content and you are able to send us a badge, it helps us. It helps support the content. So I will invite Sean into the room here. There we go. Those of you that are unfamiliar with Sean, he is the head Muay Thai coach at Easton Training Center. He is a former pro fighter. You had a few fights on Lion Fight and in K1 as well, correct, Sean?
Yeah, for Glory Kickboxing. Yep.
Yeah. So I was just giving a brief introduction of you, but why don't you introduce yourself?
Cool. What's up, guys? Thanks for joining us this morning. Yeah, like Matt said, I started in the sport about 13 years ago, closer to 14 years now. I had about 20 fights total, mostly in the U.S. I had one overseas, average fighter,
Yeah.
but I had some good experience with that. And then ultimately, I started to transition to coaching. I was one of those athletes who was kind of coaching and competing at the same time. And we all know how that generally can turn out, right? You usually need to focus on one or the other to be good at one of them, or you end up being mediocre at both. So, I ended up kind of pursuing the coaching position after having a couple of injuries that set me out for a little while. 2015 was when I really started to kind of dial in on coaching. My last fight was in 2016 for Glory, and then after that it was kind of full speed ahead with the coaching side of things. So since then I've worked with my big focus is my amateur Muay Thai athletes, but I have a couple of professionals that I work with as well, and then amateur and professional MMA fighters as well too. So I've worked with kind of the full scope of athletes with different experience levels and at various stages of combat sports, and that's kind of where I am right now.
Awesome. Well, that's going to be perfect for our conversation today, because I think one of the big assets that you have is you are working with different athletes at different stages in their career. And we're focusing on how fighters market themselves and how they can sort of build their careers. So how do you feel? Do you market your fighters personally? And if so, how do you do so?
That's a good question. And like we said earlier, I think it really depends on the level that they're competing at. When we talk about my amateur Muay Thai athletes, and I have a lot of those, I have over 20 at Easton that compete regularly. I think right now we have maybe 12 A-class athletes, which in the U.S. is 12 plus fights in that category. And then we have a ton of B-class guys and a couple of newer guys as well. With those guys, with amateur Muay Thai here in the U.S., at least at that level, I'm not worried about them marketing themselves. I'm worried about them getting more experience and becoming a better fighter that ultimately companies will be interested in working in. But if you can't build the talent first, then the marketing only goes so far with the athletes. So those younger guys that are starting off, man, I don't do anything at all related to any type of marketing with those guys. I don't care about sponsors for them. I don't care about exposure for them. I rarely post videos of my guys training and stuff in the gym. Could I do a better job of that? Maybe. But like I said, my priority for those guys is to gain experience and to keep getting better. If you're not a good fighter, if you're not a good athlete, and you're putting more time into the exposure side of things, in my mind, at least, I feel like the priorities get a little bit reversed there, So early on in your career, focus on being a good athlete, focus on getting the wins, focus on getting the experience. And then I think as that progresses, you know, the marketing and the exposure side of the sport can come with it, you know.
And at what point are you looking at sort of, you know, starting to build the fighters in terms of their marketing or their brand then?
Yeah. So I'm also gonna kind of split this into, right now I'm talking about my Muay Thai athletes, and then I'll talk about my MMA athletes, because we know that these are they're both combat sports, but these are two very different kind of industries altogether. And I'll talk about why. With my professional Muay Thai guys, obviously there's going to be a little bit more exposure with them, right? They're competing at a higher level. They have more experience, you know, so those guys, as we start to get higher up, right, you start winning A-class tournaments, you know, they start getting 20-some fights. We'll start working on, you know, how to properly market yourself, right? We'll start building videos. We'll start doing some self-promotion. We'll start learning how to reach out to companies, to talk to sponsors, you know. But until we get to that point with my Muay Thai guys, I'm not as worried about that. I'm worried about them just getting better and getting the experience necessary, you know. Now, when we go to the MMA side of things, it's very different. That track moves a lot faster, and we know that marketing yourself and branding yourself as an athlete has more priority on that side, you know, or at least there's more resources to do so right now. We have people like Conor McGregor, you know, who is big for the sport, you know, and we've seen the things that he's done and the way that he's marketed himself, you know, and a lot of people have taken a following to that and seen that as a route to be successful with marketing in MMA. So whether you agree with it or not is not necessarily the conversation, but people have seen that works, you know. So my amateur MMA guys moving to professional, or my low-level professional guys, you know, that is a priority for them, you know, in order to get seen by maybe a higher level promotion, in order to get those sponsorships to help cover expenses for training camps, so on and so forth. Management costs, stuff like that. They do need those sponsors, and they need that exposure. And ultimately, we know, you know, getting to the UFC, even then you need a certain level of exposure to get in, you know. That is actually a big priority fighting on these bigger shows. It's even true with, you know, One Championship, Bellator, all these other top tier promotions, you know, exposure is a big thing. So we start that with my amateur MMA athletes a lot earlier than I would with my Muay Thai athletes.
And just in terms of a timeline for your MMA athletes, how far along are they in their careers, or how many fights have they had when they're sort of transitioning into the pros, and also transitioning into like being a little more market minded?
That's a good question. You know, I think overall the MMA path tends to be quicker than the Muay Thai path right now, right? So what I mean by that when I say that is that you'll see a lot of people turn pro in MMA before they have 10 amateur MMA fights, you know?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is crazy, you know, like they'll get to 5-0, 6-0 as an amateur, and then they go professional right off the bat, you know? And we know on the Muay Thai side of things, even in the US, which still lacks the experience, you know, but you know, we see plenty of guys with 50, 60 amateur fights, right? That are staying amateur for the opportunity. So both of these sports move at a different trajectory and a different timeline. MMA tends to move a lot quicker. So with that being said, right, we have to work on the marketing side quicker as well too, right? Once you get a guy who has 3, 4, 5 fights, maybe he's undefeated, you know, they are starting to look for sponsors. Then they are starting to promote themselves and market themselves. So if I have a guy who has, you know, a couple of amateur fights and is doing well, we're going to start working on the promotional side of things that early. Whereas if I had an amateur Muay Thai guy who's 5-0, congrats, man. You know, like, I'll see you in the gym tomorrow. Let's keep working. Don't worry about posting shit on Instagram right now. Worry about getting better and getting the experience. So, you know, I keep these guys almost in 2 separate buckets based on the speed of how these sports are moving and what directions they're moving in.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, you know, when the Muay Thai fighters are at a level where they're looking at sponsorship or marketing themselves, what sort of things are you encouraging them to do, and what sort of culture is like created from it?
For the Muay Thai guys, you said?
Yeah, yeah. The more advanced Muay Thai guys, they're like starting to market themselves more.
And you asked what kind of what promotion we're creating.
Yeah, what sort of things are they doing to look for sponsors to sort of put themselves out there more?
Sure. Yeah, so I think the big thing that comes down to it anytime we talk about sponsorship is kind of that reciprocal value, right? Making sure that it's a two-way street. It's beneficial for both parties, right? So my athletes have to basically kind of pitch to whatever company that we're looking to seek sponsorship from, whether it's financial, equipment, supplement, whatever it is, right? That they can provide benefit on the other side of it. We know that we're going to get this product from this sponsor, right? But what can my athlete do for them? So anytime that we're pitching that, right? Maybe we're writing a letter or calling or going in and meeting in person. A big one here for us that is great is that, thankfully Easton has a giant network. We have 7 locations in Colorado. The benefit that my professional athletes here can provide is that they can get that product to all of our Easton locations, right? And they right there, they have 3,000 access to 3,000 other members that they can sell their product to. For any company, that's a pretty big jump, especially local smaller companies that are looking to sponsor, that are kind of looking to get their foot into the game. If we have a local supplement company that just started, an extra, access to an extra 3,000 people in your database is a big jump. So one of the big things I think that we target there is accessibility within our community and the ability to reach a lot more people through this athlete.
Do you feel like your community is, when the athletes do reach out to people within the Easton Training Center community, do the community members feel okay with it? Do they feel oversaturated? Do they feel like, oh, this is a good relationship? How does the community aspect work?
So I think what that really comes down to is the way that the athlete promotes it. If my athlete genuinely believes in the product and supports them 100%, most of the time we'll see that the students will also support that product because they say, hey, my coach over here really likes this and uses this. I'm going to give it a shot too. So I think what it really comes down to is the students seeing that kind of mutual benefit of that this company is supporting one of our Easton fighters, and in turn our Easton fighters supporting this company. So therefore I should be helping support this company as well. Generally in the past, that's what we see where the companies will receive that benefit if the kind of that partnership is done correctly.
Yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You sort of reinforced this point before, but just a reciprocal relationship a lot. And I feel like a lot of times sponsorship is a little bit of a misnomer because a lot of people think that sponsorship is like, okay, this person gives me something and that's it. But really it's a business relationship, or it's a relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship, which is what you said. And, people do want that, authenticity, something else that you pointed out. So in terms of the MMA fighters and, how they market themselves, what is that like? And, you referenced Conor McGregor, but Muay Thai does not have someone like Conor McGregor. The cultures are very different. And, what are some of the pros and cons of, that cultural difference in terms of marketing?
Sure. That's a great question. I think this is something that maybe gets misconstrued a little bit, or, we have MMA and we have Muay Thai, and then we see sometimes that these two start to bleed together a little bit, and Muay Thai athletes will say, well, I see these guys over here promoting like that, so I'm going to do the same thing. And what it comes across in the Muay Thai venue is inauthentic and can even be sometimes borderline like a little bit gross, where it's like, man, what are you doing? Because of the culture of Muay Thai and the traditions behind it, it doesn't really fit in that bucket as well. Where in MMA, that's the norm, right? Like I said, for better or worse, that's not really the discussion today. It is what it is. right? But yes, those guys need to promote themselves. You know, marketing is a big priority there. Exposure is a big priority. You know, getting yourself a strong fan base is a big priority. These bigger promotions want to see that. You know, that they will look for the amount of followers that you have before they make a decision about signing you. So for those guys, it's part of the job. Not only training and continuing to get better and winning fights, but also building your brand, right? Every athlete is their own brand. And so learning to build themselves as their own brand is a big part of MMA. And like I said, you know, the earlier we can start that, the better on it is. Now, I still think there's a fine line, right? And you'll see a lot of people, amateurs in particular, that will really start to focus on the promotional side of things and less so on the experience side of things, right? And that'll only get you so far. So at the end of the day, you still have to win fights. You still have to become a good fighter in order for these deals to get signed, for people to want to work with you, for promotions to want to sign you. You know, so that is still the most important part in my mind. But the promotion side is a much bigger component in the sport of MMA because of the culture of the sport, exactly like you said before.
So you think, you know, Muay Thai promotion isn't necessarily looking as much at your follower account or, you know, your IG presence as, say, an MMA promotion?
I don't think so overall. I think it's starting to trend that way a little bit. But I do think it's quite, you know, it's a bit behind MMA in that terms. You know, there's just not a giant marketing machine behind Muay Thai. You know, the UFC is such a powerful organization, and what they can do for their athletes, the visibility they can get their athletes, and everything that comes along with that. We don't have one of those in Muay Thai yet. You know, I do think down the line that's going to happen. But we are not there right now in the current state of the sport, especially in the United States. You know, so I think the priorities are different because of that.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that happened most recently is that Muay Thai has gotten IOC recognition. How do you think that will sort of improve, you know, the recognition of Muay Thai athletes, and will that help market athletes more?
100%. Yeah, and if anyone on here isn't aware of that yet, you know, just like Matt said, yesterday we received full Olympic recognition for the sport of Muay Thai, which is a huge, huge milestone for the sport. You know, we're not quite there yet in terms of being a medaled sport, but that was one big step towards that. And I think, like with any sport that joins the Olympics, the visibility and the exposure increases tenfold with that. You know, the Olympics itself, just like the UFC, is a very powerful marketing machine as well. You can love the Olympics or you can hate the Olympics, whatever your preferences are on it. Everyone knows what those 5 rings are, right? And they recognize that symbol. So, you know, Muay Thai getting into the Olympics is going to increase the visibility of the sport. It's going to increase the exposure. It's going to increase the participants in the sport, you know, and ultimately it's going to bring the sport up overall. And with that increase in all of those, you know, I think the marketing is going to start to play a much bigger part in the sport. So like I said, we're not there yet, but it's coming down the line for sure.
And, you know, since it's coming down the line and it's something we can foresee, what sort of direction do you think we should maybe push that marketing towards? And, you know, are there things that we should learn from MMA? And are there things that we should maybe keep separate from sports like MMA or boxing or, you know, other combat sports?
Yeah, that's a great question, you know, and for a long time I've always tried to do my best to separate, you know, the difference between kind of martial arts and combat sports. There are some martial arts that are combat sports like Muay Thai, but there are some combat sports that aren't martial arts. And as misleading of a name that mixed martial arts is, you know, we don't see a ton of the martial arts characteristics and behavior inside of MMA these days, you know. So I do think that there's a lot that Muay Thai athletes can learn from MMA athletes in terms of marketing. like I said, the way that, there's a big culture of trash talk in MMA right now. And a lot of that comes from Conor McGregor, right? He did it very authentically, and he did it very well. He does it very well, right? You see a lot of people try to imitate that, and it's not their authentic self. And it feels forced. And like I said, ultimately, it just comes off as kind of gross, So that part of the MMA promotion, I would love to try to keep out of Muay Thai and preserve that culture and the tradition that comes with it. But understanding how to promote yourself in other ways, just being visible to your community, interacting with your community, making posts about what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. If you go look at the Instagram of any top 10 UFC fighter, 1 out of 3 posts is a sponsorship post. They're doing Instagram lives, a lot of the time. They're staying busy. Drew Dober on our team, my Elevation Fight team, is a great example of that. He does an Instagram live a couple of times a week and interacts with the fans. And it really just builds his brand, and it builds his exposure. Stuff like that, I think, we could take from MMA and start to have our guys doing right away. Like I said, there's a fine line between these two sports. One is a kind of a martial art in my mind, and one is a combat sport. So there's lessons to be learned there, but you need to kind of chew the meat and spit out the bone. You don't want to take all of it, because I think that could kind of taint the culture of Muay Thai a little bit if we're not careful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something Nick Kwong brought up, one of our viewers, was how One Championship has differentiated themselves from, the UFC, and basically taken a polar, stance to the Western organization. They're rooted more in respect and, honor and, these sorts of, values. Do you think that is a good approach? And how can people use that sort of approach to market themselves well in, a Western setting?
Sure. Yeah, personally, I love that approach, but I also come from the Muay Thai background, so I really value, kind of those core values that one seems to operate by and the principles they operate by, and it really caters to the demographic that they have as well, right? They're obviously based in Asia, where those tend to be a little bit more of a priority. Will those work in a Western setting? I don't know. We've kind of yet to see them come over here and make a strong presence. I know they're planning on it, so I'm interested to see how that goes. It seems to be the case that most MMA fans love the trash talk. They love the bad blood. They love the build-up behind fights. And the UFC does a great job of that, For example, Corey Sandhagen and TJ Dillashaw are fighting this weekend in the main event. I've trained with Corey and as one of his coaches for over a decade. TJ was a former training partner as well. They sparred together for a long time. The UFC takes that backstory. They put some bad blood in there a little bit, and it really builds that up. One would take the opposite approach to that. They wouldn't talk about the bad blood. I don't think necessarily. They wouldn't try to pit the two athletes against each other. I would be really interested to see if that business model is going to work over here, or if they have to adjust it based on the demographics. So I think time will tell on that. I really hope that they're going to be successful making a debut on U.S. soil, because you and I know, and the viewers know, that they have fantastic fights at One. They have a really great lineup of athletes there. And if we can get them in front of an American audience and have an audience here that gets behind those athletes, that would be huge, and anything, in my mind too, that can compete with the UFC, and make them kind of look over their shoulder, I'm a big fan of as well. So I hope they're successful over here. We'll see if they have to change kind of their marketing based on the demographic when they do so.
I mean, obviously One has a few American athletes like Janet Todd and Jackie Boonton. Do you feel like the way they market themselves and, is effective for the Western audience? Because, they're more or less the, ambassadors for the organization, still ambassadors for Muay Thai, and also sort of, they're still in that Western landscape of MMA and, that sort of trash talk culture. They're definitely aware of it.
They are aware of it for sure, but I think, the way that they were brought up in the sport, not only in Muay Thai, which has the strong cultural and traditional aspects like we talked about, but also, just the coach that they are brought up under directly, Brian Popejoy and that camp, I don't think I've ever seen anyone talk trash out of
Yeah.
Boxing Works camp, so I think they're just kind of in that they are in one and they are ambassadors for the US in that aspect, but they're very much still in kind of the Muay Thai niche in terms of marketing and promotion type things. They are not really on the MMA side of things. So I don't know how many MMA fans in the US know about those two. I hope it's a lot, but when I look at Muay Thai and MMA athletes in the West still, they definitely fit in that Muay Thai bucket still versus that MMA side of promotional things. And like I said, I think that just comes down to kind of how they were brought up in the sport.
Yeah. Obviously, you've had exposure to UFC level athletes, and have you coached Janet on one of the USMF trips, or you've been around for Cancun or anything?
Yeah, I've seen her.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
So,
I haven't coached her directly though.
Yeah, you've worked with both to some extent. What is like their sort of presence like? In terms of their internet presence. Is TJ Dillashaw more popular than Janet Todd? Do you feel, or do you feel?
Oh yeah.
They're about the same, or Janet? You said TJ is definitely more popular.
I think TJ, and this is just a rough estimate, but he has well over 1 million followers on Instagram.
Oh, okay.
Where Janet, I don't know where she's at. Probably
it's probably 100.
Less than 100,000 maybe, But, TJ is also a former UFC champion. And when you reach that level of the sport with the UFC marketing machine behind you, you're going to get 1 million followers, So that's actually an interesting point that you bring up, because Corey, who's fighting him in the main event this weekend, I believe he maybe has somewhere around like 160,000 followers on Instagram, right? But if he wins this weekend, I bet that doubles. With the way the UFC will push him and just the viewership that comes with it. A main event in a UFC fight on ESPN is a very big deal. So I would say if he wins this weekend and performs well, I would anticipate him being at 300,000 followers in the next couple of weeks on Instagram.
Yeah, it's very interesting, talking about that, because, I've been around a lot of the Fairtex athletes working here. So, and seeing their rise in one championship. So, for example, Wonder Girl, before signing to one championship, she had maybe 5,000 followers. Then after her debut fight, she had 15,000. And then, her following fight, she got up to 30. The same thing basically happened more or less with Stamp, who, right when she's became popular on one championship, her popularity just burst forward, and really shows the power of being a headliner for a big organization.
100%. I'll even go one step further. This is not necessarily written on paper, but the UFC will not put you in a title fight with 100,000 followers on Instagram, on social media. It won't happen. Corey could have fought for the UFC title 3 years ago with his talent level, but no one knew who he was. This fight is designed. He's facing a former world champion now with a big following, who's coming back from a 2-year suspension from using some illegal substances, and it's in a main event slot. So like I said, if he wins, I anticipate his Instagram following to go up to somewhere around 300,000 followers, and he'll get a title shot after that. But they've never put anyone in the last at least 5, maybe 10 years, probably 5 years just to be safe to say, with a following of less than 200,000, right? Because when you're fighting for a title, that's generally on a pay-per-view card, and they need viewers, right? If people don't know who you are, they're not going to tune in to watch it. They're not going to buy the pay-per-view. So they do a really good job of building these guys up step by step, and as they continue to win, the UFC builds that marketing, behind them, and then when people know who they are, then they fight for a title. So, the UFC does a fantastic job of that.
maybe one or two questions and we'll wrap things up. So, I mean, talking about the numbers basically, how important do you think these numbers are? Because there's, the argument that more is better. You have a bigger fan base, you have more followers, it's going to grow your career. There's also the argument where it's okay, you might not have the biggest audience, but you have the right people following you.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think of that argument, and how do you think it would apply for, athletes like Muay Thai athletes?
Sure. I agree. I agree with both sides. I think to a point, the more numbers you have, obviously, the more exposure that you're creating for yourself, right? And the bigger your network is, which I think is really important. When we talk about sponsorships too, you're talking about creating a network and giving someone access to that network. That's a big part of it. So yes, the more you can grow your fan base, I think the better that it is. Like you said, though, quality is important too. You want to make sure you're targeting the right demographic, people that would be interested in accessing whatever sponsors that you're working with, right? If it's the wrong demographic or the wrong people, they're not going to care about what you're doing anyway, so it doesn't matter. And I think finally, and one that's also important too, is the engagement with your followers. You can have as many followers as you want, but if you're not engaging with them, if you're not creating dialogue and conversation with them, they're going to lose interest too, and they're not going to really be interested in what you have to say or what you have to pitch to them. If you're engaging them on a regular basis and being authentic with them, they're going to listen to what you have to say, and you have a much better chance of promoting this sponsor or this sponsor to your fan base if you're being authentic. So my recommendation to Muay Thai athletes would be, yes, continue to grow your fan base, continue to get exposure, right? But you have to be your authentic self as well, and you have to engage with who's following you, and you have a really good chance of being able to build a nice relationship between your sponsors and your fan base as well. And that should be the goal, is where everyone wins, where the sponsor wins, where you win, and also where your followers win. And if you can do that, then you've done a really good job with the marketing side.
Awesome. So just wrapping things up, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
I don't think so. I think I covered all my sides of it. Like I said at the end, I know I saw Colin just ask a question on there, kind of.
Yeah, this is a good question. How much do you encourage this sport crossover? MMA is arguably more visible for marketing than Muay Thai in Western environments. I mean, this is a great question because we do see a lot of MMA fighters in Muay Thai promotions in the States. Yep. They're not the most accomplished strikers, but they're getting positions on these cards that maybe would have gone to Muay Thai fighters. Why do you think that is? And, do you encourage it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think that just totally comes down to the visibility of those athletes. They're getting those slots because of their fan base behind them or the numbers on their social media, and it's clear that is a priority over whatever accomplishments they have in the sport. We've seen that plenty of times on shows in the US where you'll have an MMA fighter with a really big fan base that jumps over to Muay Thai for whatever reason, and it doesn't resemble any type of anything about Muay Thai, right? Striking, but it's not Muay Thai. But they're there because of their following, and the promotion is hoping that they'll bring that fan base over to Muay Thai, So at the end of the day, Andre Feely, what's up, man? At the end of the day, I don't think it's a terrible thing. If we can get more eyes on the sport of Muay Thai, that's a good thing. And if MMA athletes can help do that, advertently or inadvertently, then I think that's good. For my Muay Thai guys crossing over to MMA, it really comes down to, the finances, right? We know, man, if you want to be a pro in Muay Thai, don't quit your day job, because you're not going to make it. Definitely not in the U.S. So if money is the motivation, then obviously MMA is probably the better path right now, in this moment. And even then, right? Look, until you make it to a bigger promotion like UFC, like Bellator, you better not quit your day job then either. You can really be hurting, So it's not necessarily easier on that side of things, but there is more money at the top for the time being. So if it's a financial motivation, crossing over may be worth, kind of digging into a little bit. But if you're doing it for the passion and for the love of it, man, then stay in Muay Thai.
Awesome. Well, just wrapping things up, thank you so much for your love of the sport. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? And where can people follow along with you?
Man, just thanks for the time, Matt. I appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you guys learned something from my perspective. Feel free to follow me on here. I'll post kind of when I can. I post a mix of Muay Thai stuff and MMA stuff. So if you enjoy that, follow along for sure. I'm on here at Sean Madden _ striking. I'm on Twitter at Sean MF Madden. On Twitter, I'll talk a lot about, kind of current UFC stuff, but I'll talk about current Muay Thai topics too as well. So if you guys want to chat, join me on here or join me on Twitter, and I'll catch you guys soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. And for the people that came in late, this will be a YouTube video, and I will have that available in the next day or two. And this will be kept on the live feed for people to watch later. So thank you so much, Sean, for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right, see you.
Please like, comment, subscribe, and share.